everyone. I'm Sanisha, this is Khushi, and today we're here to talk about the experiences of international LGBTQIA plus students in the LSE environment. Here's a little bit about us. So our research question. Okay. So the research question that we've chosen is, how do international LGBTQI plus students experience the LSE environment? We wanted to explore how the cultural differences had impacted their stay at the LSE, how LSE's initiatives aided them during the whole experience, and the key areas where they found the support to be lacking.
Just to give a quick background, we realized when we looked at literature that when someone is at the intersection of being a queer student and an international student, there is a clear sense of dislocation, and there is also implicit and explicit abuse that happens at the same time, both within the university environment and in a new culture, new country that they are in. And as was spoken about, the LSE 2030 strategy talks about being more inclusive, and 70% of our population is international. So that's why we felt like this was a really important area to study. And there was a previous Changemakers project last year that looked specifically at the experience of gender non-conforming students. It gave a lot of great recommendations, but it did acknowledge that there was a bit of a gap in terms of intersectionality, and we've hoped to fill some of that through our research.
A brief overview of the methodology. So we went ahead with a focus group discussion, followed by semi-structured interviews. We also conducted a focus group discussion with experts, that is, students who had held some sort of post or role at the LSE that gave them more opportunities to interact with the general queer population at the LSE, and we wanted to get a broader sense of the overall experience. If you would have any questions about the methodology or the ethics of our research, we'd love to answer them in the Q&A round. We use certain codes for the thematic analysis that we performed on our data, and the codes were in relation to the different kinds of experience that the students had, including peer experiences, experiences in the classroom, at the accommodation, experiences with resources, which was a big one. So that's the general overview.
So based on the data that we got from our conversations with these students, we kind of came up with 6 themes. Where most of the experiences fall. The first is that there is an overdependence on free student labor. So what is happening is most students get introduced to the idea that LSE is a queer safe campus from the LGBTQ plus society that is very student run, and they don't really get that signaling from the institute till a long time. The curriculum in classroom is very department dependent. For a lot of students, their departments do not bring in inclusive readings at all. Some professors, when a student points that out, encourages them to bring that in, but that effort is not put from the professor's end in every single case. There is a huge lack of visibility of resources. So one question that we asked all of the students was, we read out a list of 10 to 12 resources that we found that the LSE has available on different parts of the website. Most students did not know more than 2 or 3. So that is a huge problem. And there's a lot of informal peer mentoring going on the campus, where like students will have to ask other students that are older and LGBTQ plus and international about how to navigate healthcare, how to navigate discrimination, all of that. So they don't really get a chance to turn to formal means of support for that. There are very limited social interactions happening. They're very focused. Essentially, what ends up happening is, because it's only the queer faculty or the other queer students, sometimes the ones that are also the same nationality as you, who you end up feeling safe interacting with. The impact of managerial decisions and administrative processes was another huge one. I think that what we realized was that there was this assumption that managerial decisions are very separate from having real life student impact, but that's actually not true at all, because a lot of students spoke about their mental health being impacted, for example, by the Stonewall decisions, and words like unsafe, a need for transparency, accountability, apathy. These are a lot of words that came up. This same trend was also seen in students' interaction with the general administration. So like if a student goes to get a name change or something, they use similar words to describe their experience. And of course, there's a lack of additional support for navigating these things. We also realized another theme was there's a strong need for more physical spaces and visibility on campus. So right now, the gender neutral washroom and the disability washrooms are the same, which means that a lot of people who are trans or are gender non-conforming do not feel comfortable using them because there is one washroom. What if a disabled person needs it? There's also the halls for international LGBTQ plus students actually end up being a place for isolation, at least in the beginning, for the very specific reason that there isn't an LGBTQ plus officer, there isn't a sub warden, there isn't a group. So there's no way of knowing if there's a safe contact within my hall. These are people that you're meeting for the first time. You don't know what their beliefs are. You don't know who your specific flatmates are. And yes, like I mentioned, safe and safe classroom environments are very, very dependent on the professors. And I would like to draw your attention to the fact that because these students are international students, what happens is if my professor is transphobic, even if I go and report them, I still have to keep coming into that unsafe classroom environment because it will impact my tier 4 student visa. That is a huge problem. And it is not just professors' behavior within the class, but also outside of the class, like on their social media, etc., that is impacting that feeling of safety. And then funding issues was another huge one. So the LGBT society gets its funding from memberships, which is the same way that the rowing society and the dancing society get it. I don't know about you, but my impression is that the LGBTQ plus society probably isn't something that people join out of interest or to take part in competitions. So it really shouldn't have the same source of funding. And there is also a need for essential other funding support for people to access more gender positive resources. A quick look at some of the direct quotes that we got. I'll just read out one for us. You can read the other ones. So a postgraduate student said that about the discrimination that they felt due to the management's decision. Like if they can do this on one issue, which is the trans debate, they could do it for anything else. They could do it for other queer identities. They could do it for other ethnic minorities, where they just decide to be like, we don't need to discuss that much or something like that. So there's this sense of it being an indicator or a beginning of this snowball of discrimination that is coming towards people's ways.
So we'd like to talk a bit about the recommendations that we came up based on the findings that Khushi just illustrated upon. The first one is sensitizing students and faculty members, which could be done through training workshops that are gender sensitive and trans inclusive. The resources available need to be made more visible and accessible. This could be done by creating a centralized space or a repository where all resources are like free to explore, and they should be communicated to the students, and it should be made available on a regular basis. There needs to be transparency and accountability on behalf of the management, especially when making decisions that affect LGBTQ plus students and staff. They need to be consulted, their feedback needs to be heard. The LSE's physical and administrative infrastructure needs to be more inclusive. As Khushi mentioned, the gender neutral toilets and the disabled washrooms need to be separated, and administrative processes like name changes need to be made simpler for people who are accessing it. LSE Hall, we highly recommend having an LGBTQ plus officer or a committee or even a group, so that people, especially during exam time, during the summer when there are no activities happening on campus, they should have a space at home where they can be queer and be happy. And the onus for inclusivity majorly needs to shift from students to the institution. This could be done through university-wide social events, especially during the beginning of the term. And also we can create an opt-in program where queer students are matched with queer staff who can guide them on how to navigate life at the LSE. We can create a guideline that is on LGBTQ plus inclusion, on how to make classrooms and courses more inclusive, and we can help faculty members to implement those that. Also, we need to encourage more formal and informal groups on campus. We need to subsidize the membership fees of those organizations so they're more accessible. And lastly, financial aid. That is a major concern too. We could create a separate funding, a pool of funds for queer students who have personal circumstances or housing issues, the cost of living issues. And at the very least, what we can do is create a repository on the website that leads them to charities or organizations that provide funding to queer students at the university. Some gaps and in general about the further scope of the study. We could also talk about PhD students. There needs to be a specific focus on trans, non-binary, gender, non-conforming students. We could explore the differences that undergraduate and postgraduate students have with their experience and cater resources to them based on it. We also wanted to look at disabled and neurodivergent students. That's something that can be taken up. And lastly, something that's very important is the queer staff. We've spoken to some members of the spectrum over the last term, and yeah, that also needs to be taken up very urgently, we feel. Yeah, that's pretty much it. We hope you enjoy the presentation.
And we look forward to your questions.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Tanisha and Kushi, for such a fantastic start to the afternoon. I'm happy to welcome Joshua James Atienza from the School of Public Policy, who is joining us online. Josh, do we have you? And can I invite you to share your slides? Yes.
I'm just here.
Oh, cool. You're audible, and
Yes.
I'm going to mute myself and take it away. Thank you so much.
Perfect. Thank you so much for this opportunity. Hello, everybody. My name is Josh, and I'm an MPA student with the School of Public Policy. So today I'm eager to share my findings on the impact of the cost of living crisis on MPA academic performance, but also their sense of community belonging. So the first challenge of this research was defining the scope of the work, considering feasibility considerations, its impact, and the sensitivity of the topic. So I was very mindful of the responsibility of trying to deliver these insights with a sense of nuance, but also making sure that it was feasible for like the Changemakers platform to kind of be able to kind of give informed recommendations towards the end. Ultimately, I wanted to resort to what I knew very best, and that was my very own cohort. So the MPA program at the School of Public Policy prides itself with a diverse talent pool from all over the world, with 229 students from 35 different nationalities. So the typical MPA student profile is about 26 years old, with some work experience in a variety of fields such as economics, engineering, and etc. So I wanted to leverage this diversity to understand the possible heterogeneous impacts of the crisis among MPA students. So just a bit of context, like what does it mean to actually live through a cost of living crisis? So the Russell Group conducted a cost of living survey with about 8,800 respondents and found that 94% of students were concerned with the cost of living crisis, and this has had a negative and significant impact on their academic performance and mental health. Just another point that I thought was really interesting, with increased living costs, 1 in 4 students were finding themselves going hungry as they could not afford food. So these findings in themselves are concerning, and I kind of wanted to scope out this issue within the LSE context. So speaking a little bit about the research methodology, I had a lot of insightful discussions on methodology with my Changemaker supervisors, Gabby Harris, and we recognized that studying a dynamic topic like cost of living required collection of primary data through surveys. So we kind of looked at an entire variety of different data sources. So for example, there was also a lot of data on data hardship funds that we kind of considered. But ultimately, I consulted with ethics and data teams at LSE to kind of think about how we can do this safely, but also have an informative data set. So I was initially concerned with response rates associated with surveys. So I wanted to launch a survey that was user-friendly by making sure that I launched it on a secure and accessible platform like Qualtrics. I designed it to be really, really short, but informative. So I only just used 20 questions, but I also collected responses over 3 weeks at the beginning of the summer term. So this was over like May 8th to the May 26th. And I did grassroots recruitment for this project. So I reached out to a lot of social media channels like WhatsApp, different social media like Instagram, as well as my departmental channels to kind of incentivize participation. One key thing that was also immensely helpful was that Changemakers was very generous in offering participation incentives for the study. So kind of introducing a little bit of the respondent demographics. So I got about 65 different survey respondents, which is pretty good. This corresponds to about, as I said earlier, this is about 28% response rate for the entire cohort. 85% of the respondents were MPA year ones, 65% identified as female, and about 55% were about 25 to 30 years old. So our respondents were primarily or predominantly Asian and white. And the first question that I really hoped to answer was, do MPA students feel the pinch? And that begins with looking at how students were financing their education. So quickly looking at the data here, unsurprisingly, most MPA students are combining a variety of modalities to finance their education, such as parental support, individual savings, part-time work, scholarship, and loans. So at the time of reporting, about 52% of students reported discussing the cost of living crisis weekly. But what our data will show is that at a minimum, MPA students discuss the crisis at least once a month. So I guess this is to say that we are public administration students after all. When asked about their level of concerns of the issue, 85% reported that they're personally concerned with the crisis, and 90% reported that increased living costs had made it more difficult to manage their student finances. So taken together, the cost of living crisis has impacted the MPA student experience. And I wanted to unpack this further by looking at its impact on academic performance and community belonging at SPP. So quickly talking about academic performance amidst a cost of living crisis. To understand the impact of the crisis on academic performance, I wanted to look at three main kind of factors. So I wanted to see how the cost of living crisis affected students' ability to perform to their desired standards, their ability to attend academic support sessions, and ultimately their ability to attend professional development opportunities. So quickly looking at the data here, as you can see, I've shown you the three different metrics. The data suggests that the impact of the cost of living crisis on academic performance in part is heterogeneous, and this may simply be founded in the fact that each individual student has unique financial realities. However, the data does show that at least 39% of students agree or strongly agree that the crisis impeded their ability to perform academically to their desired standards. And approximately 44% of students reported greater difficulty attending academic support sessions due to increased living costs. So finally, I also wanted to look, actually, this is by great recommendation from Claire Gordon when I first presented this project during the LSE Changemaker Showcase, was looking at community belonging. So the negative implications of cost of living crisis seems a little bit more pronounced in terms of community belonging. So I measured this based on how has the cost of living impacted a student's ability to feel integrated into the greater community, their ability to participate in extracurricular activities, and their ability to ultimately attend social events. And what we can see is that it seems more pronounced in terms of community belonging, the particular effects, with 43% of students agree or strongly agreeing that the crisis has affected their perceived integration into the greater SPP community. 63% agreed or strongly agreed that this crisis impacted their decision to participate in extracurriculars. And about 52% agreed or strongly agreed that the crisis affected their decision to attend social events. So this is kind of interesting in many ways. And I guess the last part would be, how have MPAs responded to this particular challenge? So what you see here is just basically the same scale, strongly agree, all the way to strongly disagree. And we're kind of looking at different, I guess, response mechanisms. So for example, looking at borrowing, budgeting, opting for cheaper options, or even part-time work. So these findings are probably the most illuminating part of the study. This is what I'm most excited about, in that the data suggests that unlike the Russell Group finding, MPA students are not actively borrowing more to meet their shortfalls, but rather are opting for budgeting or finding cheaper options for their daily necessities. So students also seem to be split in terms of actively seeking for extra sources of income through part-time work or scholarships. So these findings better contextualize some of the trends that we saw earlier in academic performance and community belonging. And that, for example, if students are largely relying on part-time work to meet their shortfalls, they may have a greater difficulty accessing support sessions or socials in their free time. So these observed trends warrant further study in how they may affect student performance and belonging. So the last piece that I'll say now is just talking about the recommendations. Sorry, I just wanted to make sure. And then, so in my own experience and research with cost of living, students are not well-versed at all in terms of being informed about the support schemes that are available to them, particularly at LSE or just as a whole. So my first recommendation to LSE is place a greater emphasis on promoting existing LSE support schemes. So for example, there's hardship funds, different catering offers, or financial management courses through LSE Life, which for example, I actually attended myself just to kind of scope it out. Our data also suggests that there's a lot of value in re-examining the student experience to see how events can be made more accessible globally. So for example, the School of Public Policy has already started to consider options such as like recording support sessions or different scheduling times for social events to make sure that you're making that these events are accessible to all kinds of students. And then finally, I think the topic in itself actually warrants further study, especially with the fact that cost of living will remain topical with inflationary pressures in the economy globally. And LSE should continue to monitor the situation and conduct in-house research towards evidence-based decision-making when it comes to student wellness. So the last part of my presentation, I quickly just want to say thank you to everybody that helped me out with this project, particularly Gabby Harris for her unwavering support and fantastic insights as a supervisor, Lydia and Ellis, who are just never-ending support throughout this entire journey, Akila and also Claire from the Eden Center, who had fantastic input on this when I presented to them, but also my fellow changemakers from SBP and MSN Shruti for just their support. Thank you so much, and I look forward to see where this project goes next.
Joshua, thank you so much. That's absolutely brilliant and fascinating. We will bring you back in for the questions. We'll introduce our final presentation for this panel. Have I got this? He's on mute. Let's check. I'll just try that. I think that's good. I want to introduce our final speaker for panel one. Super excited to hear from Peter Opabua, who's going to be talking about factors for the decline in participation of Black students in LSE and LSE-SU sports teams. Yes, sorry, I need to share one. Apologies for using this.
Hi, everyone. I hope you're having a good day today. I'm here to walk you through my LSE Changemakers project, which is about exploring the factors for the decline in Black students' involvement in LSE-SU sports team. I get mouthy every time. I had notes to help me through this, but I felt like I was way too passionate about this subject, so I'm just going to dive straight into it about the notes. I'm going to walk you through a quick introduction, a brief literature review, the research methods, findings, and the recommendations. So just a brief introduction as to what inspired my Changemakers project. For me personally, sports has always been my life. You know, there was a time in my life when I was homeless, and I have very fond memories of that time because of sports. LSE throws a lot of work at you, and the only thing I can look forward to is sports on a Wednesday afternoon, which is why I wanted to somewhat recreate that experience for other students as well. I work in the SU as well, you know, try to facilitate some sort of help to other students who, you know, are interested in sports or just societies in general. Hence why I wanted to pursue, like, you know, how to make sports inclusive for everyone at LSE. However, I took part in the varsity last year, and which is like the flagship sport event between LSE and Imperial. Out of the varsity team, there were 24 members, and 2 out of the 24 members were from an ethnic minority background, which to me seemed like an issue, but not substantial at the time. Fast forward to this year, the varsity team, 3 out of 22 people are from an ethnic minority background, which from a percentages perspective, great. From an eye or visual perspective, is still awful. Hence why I wanted to, thanks to the Changemakers team, pursue a project up as to how to improve the participation of Black students at not just sports in general, but like at LSE in general as well. Moving on from that, as you can see on here, thanks to LSE, I got some statistics on, you know, population of students at LSE has increased, population of Black students at LSE has increased, population of the amount of students in the AU Athletic Union has increased, population of Black students in the AU has increased. However, again, once you take a look at it, like, you know, the eye test, look for yourself, is, you know, the the representation amount is pretty much not disgusting, but awful. Hence why I wanted to pursue this project. And that led to the following research questions. Why are certain ethnic groups, specifically Black students at LSE, unwilling to participate in sports at LSE? And more importantly, how can they be motivated for greater participation? Thanks to many informal conversations I had, that helped me narrow down the main themes of my research project. That included motivation, strategic choice, and social identity. Thanks to one of my favorite people at LSE, she was a changemaker last year who actually introduced me to changemaker. Hello. And she carried out research last year on disabled students' experiences of the SU, which somewhat tied into mine as well, in that we're researching how to better improve and underrepresented groups' experiences at LSE. There's also like the other two researches that focuses on social identity and motivation, and that pretty much laid the foundation for how to explore, how to explore the causes for why Black students are unwilling, and also how to improve their experiences. For the research methods, I explored two types of methods. I explored a mixed approach, which is the quantitative survey, which is essentially about establishing a foundation for the factors that motivate students to play a sport at LSE, and compare it amongst ethnic groups. So take the different ethnic groups at LSE, Black students, white, Asian, for example, look at each individual ethnic groups, what is going well in some and what isn't going well in comparison to Black students. Again, informal conversations I had prior to conducting the research helped narrow down the themes and the questions that were going to be asked in the survey. And I used things like a like-up scale, which was inspired by the previous research I cited in the literature review. And more importantly, they enabled me to carry out a numerical / statistical analysis on the responses I received. For example, the responses respondent gave, one would be like one was a strongly disagree. Sorry, in the survey, students were asked to pick between strongly disagree and strongly agree. During the statistical analysis, I was able to convert strongly agree to 5s, strongly disagree to 1s, and then get a numerical value from that to compare amongst all ethnic groups. Aside from that, I also carried out a qualitative semi-structured focus group discussion. This was, I don't know why, but one of the most difficult things I've ever done, because I tried to remain impartial, but at the same time, I was quite swayed by the students' experiences and how honest they were in that this is what is going wrong and this is what they'd like to see improve. And also because I could also resonate to that as well based on my experiences. I was able, surprisingly, receive a lot more requests to take part in the discussion than I had spaces for. So thanks to the generous reward by the Changemakers team, I could only entertain 10 students, or I believe I received like 23. So I had to pick randomly. I'm guessing the incentives that you guys offered played a part in that. I was able to pick randomly and spread that across like different year groups. So I believe 4 first years, 4 second years, 3 third years, because the changes, if changes are made, will be more impactful to the first and second years. Yeah, and also, yeah, just to summarize, like participants were chosen randomly by year of study. And also some people that had taken part in the sport at LSE and people that have not taken part in the sport at LSE as well. And the findings from that included, from the motivation aspect, there isn't much of a significant difference amongst like all ethnic groups. Just a quick note, we had to exclude some ethnic minority groups from the statistical analysis because the amount of responses we received wasn't enough or wasn't significant enough to carry out some analysis on them. So the main responses were from Asian and Asian descent, Black descent, and white descent. And from a motivation perspective, what we found out was that there isn't a significant difference amongst all ethnic groups. They're all somewhat equally motivated to participate in sports at LSE, whether it's like intrinsic or whether it's extrinsic. Regardless of that, all ethnic groups are basically similar, just as motivated as each other. So that wasn't essentially a cause for concern. Moving on to the element of strategic choice, which is essentially when you like take a sport LSE versus playing a sport outside of LSE, are students more leaning towards outside of LSE than at LSE? When it comes to like how expensive it is, for example, are they willing to pay the expensive prices to play a sport LSE in comparison to not at LSE? So these are examples of the questions that went into the survey. I'd rather play with my friends than play for LSE. One thing to note was that the questions were phrased in a positive way or negative way, shall I say. So like one of the questions were, rather play at LSE and outside of LSE than at LSE. And if majority of the responses were, strongly agree, then the average would be like a lot higher. So I had to, I guess, take the difference, if that makes sense to you guys, which is why the response of the ratings are a lot lower. And the impact of this is that a higher rating suggests that an ethnic group is less impacted by the concept of making a choice between playing at LSE and alternative options. Again, similar to the previous one, there is a lack of discernible difference here. So that shows that, amongst all ethnic groups, there isn't much of a cause for concern here as well. However, the most important one and quite shocking element was the social identity aspect. Because of time, I'm going to summarize very quickly, is that Black students ranked significantly lower in the social identity element of the survey. They disagree with the notion that they're able to create connections among students at LSE, form a rapport, and also relate to other members of the sports at LSE. This was also corroborated by the focus group discussions that I carried out. The first question was literally, talk me through your experiences of sport at LSE. And without mentioning anything about social identity, that's what majority of the students dive into, in that they feel like they don't belong. They feel like, there's barely anyone that looks like them. They can't relate to the students at LSE. And again, this was where I struggled to remain impartial, because I can relate to those experiences as well. But as a researcher, I can't say, yeah, sure, I agree with you, because that's leading. So yeah, like I said, they said that the social norms, for example, as proven to like a major hindering factors. They can't essentially assimilate with the environment at LSE because it's just not their type of environment and vibe. The biggest one that came up was like the social economic aspect. Some people mentioned that they've never been skiing and like at LSE, for example, they will be less willing to like take part in skiing because to them, that seems like a sport for like rich white students. So that's examples of things that came up in the focus group discussions, which highlighted that social identity is the main hindering factor for that. And more importantly, I asked the students, what would they like to see improve at LSE? They gave a lot of suggestions, which as you can see on here, this is some, not even all of it. However, I was able to like summarize them into like 2 main key points, which is to reduce the strategical choice barriers for Black students at LSE, and also to provide a safe space and a more inclusive environment for Black students at LSE. Examples of like the second one, which I feel like is more important, is that things like the social element, the social identity, there's quite a bit of like the current climate that like favors more like white students, if that makes sense. So we need more events, more activities that is more inclusive to all. One example is that, the Islamic Society in UCL are able to like run their sort of societies in conjunction with like the main sports societies and still feel included, whereas at LSE, that's not even an option at all. So for the sake of time, these are the main recommendations that all the students came up with and hopefully see implemented in the future at LSE. That's it. Thank you very much for listening. I wanted to say special thank you to Kashi for handling many mini breakdowns, and to the Changemakers team for giving me the opportunity to explore this. And this is definitely something that I like to, explore further in the future as well. Thank you.